One of my favourite YouTube videos from 2023 was M. Lemon's Ghost of the 72 Dolphins, which detailed NFL teams and their pursuit of the perfect season. I've never seen an NFL game in my life, and yet I found myself engaged the entire time, hearing tales of multiple NFL teams chase sporting perfection. After the video was over, and I do recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it, I turned my mind to the NRL. Since the formation of the NRL in 1998, no team has achieved the perfect season. With the multitude of rounds each year, no team has ever, or likely will ever, really get close. In the NRL, the measure of a team's quality comes from their ability to win premierships. And right now, we're in the midst of a run of the greatest team in NRL history, the Penrith Panthers. Since 2021, the Panthers have had a stranglehold on the top trophy and are seemingly showing no signs of slowing down. With their historic third retention of their premiership in October of this year, I decided to look back and piece together how this team achieved what no team in the 26 years of the NRL has done before, and how their star player would overcome consistent criticism to cement his legacy. To begin, we'll start in 2019. The 2010s were a mixed bag for the Panthers. They started the decade by coming second in the regular season, only to come 12th the following year. This trend would continue for the next few years, as bad seasons would follow good ones seemingly interchangeably. Fans were getting frustrated, and General Manager Phil Gould's talks of a 5-year plan were regularly ridiculed, as the Panthers' form refused to be consistent. In 2019, it seemed that things were destined to change. After surprisingly firing head coach Anthony Griffin just 5 weeks before the final series in 2018, the following year started with Ivan Cleary coaching the squad, a team which would feature his son Nathan as the halfback. By sacking their previous coach at such a pivotal time in the 2018 season, it was clear the Panthers were investing in Ivan and hoping for meaningful success. Success which had eluded the Panthers since their last premiership win in 2003. However, the team would struggle to reach consistency again. They started the 2019 season with a dismal record of 2-8 in their first 10 games. Despite a late string of wins in the season, the Panthers failed to reach the finals, ending the 2010s with 5 trips to the finals and 5 times they missed out. If the Panthers were planning on achieving the success they'd been chasing, it'd need to happen in a new decade. Which brings us to 2020. 2020 would see a huge change for the Panthers. After starting the season with 3 wins, a loss, and a draw, they did not lose a game for the rest of the regular season, with an incredible 15 wins in a row, taking the club to first place, winning their first minor premiership since 2003. I said in the introduction that a perfect season would be impossible in the NRL, but with the shortened season due to COVID, the Panthers got as close as you can. Now, this wasn't a club meekly slipping into the final series, like their fans might have been used to. This was a young squad, showing their dominance over the rest of the NRL. They were a much different team from years past. They were now a team that would put their foot on the throats of their opponents until they were satisfied. Younger players who had trouble finding form were now among the best in the entire competition. Their forwards were feared, their try scorers consistently crossing the line, and their halves were steering the ship confidently. Quite simply, this was a team that could do no wrong. After 2 close wins in their first 2 games of the final series, their streak extended to 17 wins in a row, the longest in the NRL since 2002. And with that, the Penrith Panthers had reached their first grand final in 17 years. And then they met the Melbourne Storm. The Storm were no strangers to grand finals. In fact, since the NRL was formed, they had now reached their 10th grand final appearance, more than any other team. Now, the Panthers had the desire, they had the hunger for success. But the Storm had done it all before. They had the experience. In the 2020 Grand Final, when they needed it the most, the Penrith Panthers collapsed. Led by arguably the greatest NRL player of all time, Cameron Smith, in his last game, the Storm embarrassed the Panthers, and after 40 minutes, the Storm led 22-0. Despite former Penrith general manager Phil Gould's claims on commentary throughout the first half,
I honestly feel like the Panthers are on top. The run of the play, I feel like they're doing better than the Melbourne Storm.
The Panthers were shell-shocked. After 50 minutes, the score became 26-0. Basic errors and defensive lapses showed that the Panthers were not prepared for the bright lights of the grand final. And yet, there was still that hunger for success. In the final 25 minutes, the Panthers clawed their way back to make the score somewhat respectable and have a chance to send the game into extra time. With less than 10 seconds left, they had just one shot. And they had no clue what to do. The rally had been snuffed out, as this side which had dominated all year began impotently passing the ball back and forth. The game was over, and the Panthers had lost. Critics after the game singled out the young members of the squad, particularly Nathan Cleary, who had thrown a costly intercept. But the NRL year was not over. As a result of COVID, the highly anticipated State of Origin series between the states of New South Wales and Queensland took place at the end of the year, rather than during the middle of the season. As Cleary was chosen to play as the best halfback in New South Wales, it seemed that he could still end the year with some credibility. After all, the opposing team of Queenslanders were fielding what was referred to as the worst State of Origin team of all time, consisting of nearly 14 representative debutants across the 3 games. Compared to the elite New South Wales players, this should have been a slaughter. But Cleary's horror end to the season wasn't over yet, as Queensland pulled off an upset which needed to be seen to be believed, as they ended up winning the State of Origin series 2-1. For Nathan Cleary, the worst occurred after the game, when the best player of the series was announced to be Queensland's Cameron Munster, a man who had been a part of the victorious Melbourne Storm team a month prior. Now, Munster applauded Cleary's efforts on stage and showed some great sportsmanship.
Just want to shout out to Nathan Cleary. Been killing it all year, mate. Big fan, and mate, the way you played this year is outstanding.
But Cleary was crushed. 2 high-profile losses on such a young player stung, as Cleary was singled out by the critics yet again. And once more, the Penrith Panthers looked to the next year. The Panthers had shown that they could get to the grand final, but for 2021, they needed to win it. Anything else would have been a disappointment for the club. The year featured the Panthers' best ever start to the season, as they won their first 12 games in a row, including a famous victory over their now rivals, the Melbourne Storm. This meant the Panthers had won 27 regular season games in a row across the 2020 and 2021 seasons. But as coach Ivan Cleary stated before the 2020 grand final, those games don't really matter unless you win at the grand final. For his son Nathan Cleary, some success and redemption was found during New South Wales' State of Origin campaign. In a dramatic turnaround from the previous year, New South Wales utterly dismantled Queensland in 2 of the most one-sided Origin games of all time, with a scoreline of 76-6 after just 2 games. Whilst Cleary would not play in the 3rd game due to an injury, he was still an important part of New South Wales' success. As the 2021 regular season ended, the Panthers were in 2nd place, only missing out on the minor premiership due to their for and against. The team that placed first? Our old friends the Melbourne Storm, who actually broke the Panthers' winning streak in a single season by winning 19 in a row. At this point, the Panthers were heavy favourites to make the grand final. However, their finals run was not going to be easy. In a round 1 upset, the Panthers were actually defeated by the South Sydney Rabbitohs, with many making the claim that the Panthers were simply unable to win the games that mattered. Once again, the young team which had achieved so much in the regular season seemed to be crumbling when it counted. If the Panthers wanted to make the grand final, they would need to win the next 2 games in back-to-back weeks. After a nail-biter of a win against their Western Sydney rivals, the Parramatta Eels, they were only 1 win away. However, in a bit of rugby league symmetry, the team standing in their way of a return to the NRL Grand Final was the Melbourne Storm, the same team which would humbled the previous year. However, this time, the Melbourne Storm would not have the leadership of Cameron Smith. The Panthers needed revenge and got out to a 10-0 lead. The Storm weren't to be beaten that easily and returned serve until there were only 4 points separating the two teams. Eventually, it came down to the final minute, with the Storm desperate to win, and, in a similar vein to the Panthers the year prior, completely capitulated when their season needed it the most. Despite dominating the regular season, the Melbourne Storm were the ones falling short, and it would be the Penrith Panthers making their second consecutive grand final, against the team which would humbled them in round 1, the South Sydney Rabbitohs. It was a tense grand final, with the Panthers maintaining a 2-point lead at half-time. The game was quickly gridlocked in the second half, with neither team wanting to blink first, until eventually...
The corner, there's an intercept for Crichton! Crichton, he's away! Is he away with the premiership?
A Stephen Crichton intercept saw the Panthers take the lead once again, and despite a late try to the Rabbitohs, a missed conversion by Adam Reynolds would seal it. After years of mediocrity and a heartbreaking end to the 2020 season, the Penrith Panthers had finally achieved the success which they had been praying for, with their first major premiership since 2003. A cherry on top was Nathan Cleary receiving the Clive Churchill Medal for Best on Ground, which provided redemption from the previous year's disappointment and returning serve at those who had labelled him as unable to perform on the biggest stage in the NRL. The Panthers celebrated. After all, they'd earned it. But as the off-season began, everyone's thoughts turned to the 2022 season. In what was now becoming a norm, Penrith were favourites before an NRL game was played in the 2022 season. However, only one team in the then 24 years of the NRL had ever actually retained a premiership, the 2018 to 2019 Sydney Roosters. Despite their favouritism to make the finals, winning the comp outright was not seen as a likely option. After all, Penrith had lost their strike centre Matt Burton and their consistently performing second rower Kurt Capewell, and it was then announced that both Api Coruscant and Viliami Kikau would be leaving the club at the end of the 2022 season. For most clubs, this outside noise would prove too much. The Panthers would respond to this by winning their first 9 games, all in a relatively convincing manner. Their first loss came at the home ground to the Parramatta Eels, who gained some retribution for being eliminated in the previous year's final series. Despite having a simply electric start to the year, Nathan Cleary was singled out for the loss, with, once again, many referring to him as a player who could only perform if his team was up to the task. Now, this chat was only reinforced during the 2022 State of Origin series. New South Wales was once again upset by Queensland in the first game, with Cleary being seen to only step up in the second game of the series. However, this was after Queensland had a man sent to the sin bin and had to defend 12 and 13. This meant that whilst Cleary put on a great performance, critics could still refer to him as a flat-track bully. And to many, the critics were right, as Cleary's performance in the tense and close series decider left a lot to be desired, even featuring on the wrong end of Ben Hunt's famous intercept to win the series for Queensland. Such a costly error seemed to have overridden any goodwill Nathan Cleary might have earned from last year's Clive Churchill winning performance. Despite any outside criticism, though, the Panthers still marched on in the 2022 season. Convincing wins were consistent, until they once again met up with the Parramatta Eels, where this happened.
Just played their way back into it. Oh, no, that's not good. That is not good. Cleary has dumped him into the ground here.
Wow.
Nathan Cleary could be in strife.
Okay, hands are between the legs, dribbling him into the ground.
He's off! Cleary's off!
suddenly Penrith's surefire march to the grand final had an asterisk next to it. Nathan Cleary would be suspended for 4 weeks, with his first game back to be the first game of the final series. Now, in a testament to their dominance throughout 2022, the Panthers still claimed the minor premiership easily, to the extent that they actually rested over 10 players in the last game of the regular series, more or less intentionally throwing a game to the North Queensland Cowboys. In an interesting twist of fate, the first round of the finals would see the Penrith Panthers, with the return of Cleary, face off against the Parramatta Eels, the one team that Penrith could not defeat in 2022. There were plenty of questions surrounding Cleary's preparation and Parramatta's status as a perpetual bogey team for the Panthers. The answer was clear. In an incredibly dominant performance, Nathan Cleary led the Panthers to a 27-8 victory. This dominance would be repeated in the preliminary final, which would be a grand final rematch against the Rabbitohs. Despite some first half jitters, the Panthers would confidently win 32-12 and stamp their ticket to a third straight grand final, and were only one win away from retaining their premiership. Their opponents in the grand final? In a bit of poetry only rugby league could produce, it would be the Parramatta Eels, who in a similar manner to the 2021 Panthers, had gone the hard way to make the grand final. In fact, in another similarity to the previous year's Panthers, they too were looking to end a premiership drought. It seemed that it could be a potential fairy tale for the Parramatta side. However, as poetic as rugby league can be, it's certainly no fairy tale. Despite 2 late tries to the Eels, it made no difference. It wasn't even close. The Panthers put on one of the most dominant grand final performances in history, as they easily beat the Eels 28-12. The Penrith juggernaut showed the rugby league community that they had truly learnt how to survive in grand finals. Not only that, they'd learned how to thrive, as they turned up the heat to the Parramatta underdogs and didn't take their foot off the throat until the game was well and truly wrapped up. The difference between 2020's performance and the 2022 grand final couldn't be more stark. This was no longer a team of upstarts. This was a team of champions who had now retained their premiership, just the second time in NRL history that this had ever happened. Despite the significance of this achievement, though, the reception from NRL fans was muted. After all, fans had just seen a team go back-to-back in 2019, so despite the difficulty of this accomplishment, there was an overall reaction of, so what, from the fans. And once the final siren had sounded, supporters of all teams looked towards 2023, with the number one question on everyone's minds being, the Panthers surely can't go 3 in a row, can they? The last time any rugby league team had won 3 major premierships in a row dated back to our friends the Parramatta Eels, who had won 3 New South Wales rugby league competitions in a row across 1981 to 1983. But in the now 25-year history of the NRL, forget about it. The team that came the closest to a 3-in-a-row run were the Sydney Roosters. However, their attempt in 2020 would suffer a disastrous late-season collapse. Considering the Panthers had lost 2 pivotal players after their back-to-back premierships, it seemed a similar fate awaited them. After all, they lost the World Cup challenge to the English Super League champions St Helens in a surprising upset in the pre-season. To make matters worse, it was a home game for the Panthers. This trend of upsets continued as they lost their first game of the regular season to the Brisbane Broncos, a team mostly comprised of young players that hadn't even made the finals the previous year. 2 consecutive losses at home had not occurred for the Panthers since well before their reinvention. Just maybe, the wheels had fallen off for the Penrith juggernaut. A close win over the Rabbitohs seemed to provide some relief, before the Panthers would lose in extra time in a grand final rematch to the Parramatta Eels. By the end of round 10, the Panthers had won 5 games, but lost 4, including an embarrassing loss to the West Tigers, who hadn't won a game in over a year. Whilst the team was still playing well, they were comfortably in the top 4. This was the Panthers' worst start to a season since 2019. This was also heading towards State of Origin season, and once more Nathan Cleary would have an underwhelming performance in the first game. This caused the familiar criticisms to emerge once again. Despite being a two-time premiership winner and a Clive Churchill medalist, Cleary was once again labelled as a good player in a great team. Most critics felt that Cleary simply had not had a career-defining moment in a big game. A common critique was that when the games got close, Cleary wasn't the player to grab it by the scruff of the neck and take charge to win. And it seemed like these claims were about to be validated, as Cleary would get injured in a round 14 game against the Dragons. In his absence over the following 6 weeks, the Panthers would only lose once, with Cleary's replacement being reserve grade halfback in Jack Cogger. To many, this displayed what had made Penrith so unstoppable in the 2020s. They were a great system, who could simply sub anyone in and still get the results. Once again, the now absent Nathan Cleary was seen as a great player, sure, but someone who wasn't living up to his potential. These claims seemed to fire up Cleary, who upon his return would be a part of some of Penrith's most dominant wins of the season, including over the Cronulla Sharks and the Melbourne Storm, two teams who would be firmly a part of the final series. After a surprise defeat to the Eels, once again continuing the Eels' run of victories against them in the regular season, the Panthers finished the 2023 season with a convincing win over the Cowboys, ensuring they would claim the minor premiership, their third in 4 years. Now experienced in finals games, the Panthers easily beat the 4th place New Zealand Warriors in the first round of the finals, before crushing the 3rd place Melbourne Storm to ensure their 4th grand final in a row. A feat not seen since the infamous Melbourne Storm team of the mid-2000s, a team which had been cheating the salary cap. The question being, could they make history and win their 3rd grand final in a row? Their opponents were the Brisbane Broncos. As mentioned earlier, this was a young team who were hungry for success. Throughout their 2023 season, the Broncos were the team to watch, as their forwards were running hard, and as a team they were producing some of the best highlight reels in the competition. It wasn't difficult to make comparisons between this Broncos side and the Panthers side of the early 2020s. In fact, this had been the grand final almost everyone had been predicting and salivating over for months, and it would truly live up to the hype. Despite dominating possession and field position, the Panthers only held a 2-point lead at half-time. The Broncos had made a plethora of errors compared to the near-perfect handling of the Panthers, and yet the Broncos were still in it. And as the second half started, it seemed that the Penrith Panthers were finally running out of steam.
From a standing start with blistering footwork, he's beaten up a pace man for the corner. What a try! Up to Cogger, tried to make the tackle. Mam again, straight through. Ezra Mam is going to get a try, scoring double in the grand final. Brisbane are motoring home.
Here's Mam again for the line. Ezra Mam, he scores. It's a hat-trick in the blink of an eye. And the Broncos threaten to run away with the grand final.
With less than 20 minutes to go, the Panthers were trailing by 16 points. And to make matters worse, Cleary's half partner, Jerome Luai, was out of the game with an injury. Electric second rower Scott Sorensen was out of the game. And Cleary's co-captain Isaiah Yeo was taken off for a head injury assessment. This was grim for the Panthers. It seemed that not only would they lose the grand final, it seemed that they were about to get absolutely steamrolled. Considering Cleary's reputation of not being able to stand up when his back was against the wall, it was a near certainty that this period of dominance for the Panthers was over. But with 17 minutes to go, Nathan Cleary stepped up. In a virtually unwinnable situation, in the biggest game of the year, and with his teammates all over the park, Nathan Cleary produced the greatest 17 minutes a halfback could ever come up with. A line break, a try assist, a 40-20, another try assist, another line break, and a try would be a great overall game for any halfback in a grand final. Nathan Cleary did this in just 17 minutes, under the most pressure and scrutiny imaginable. In doing so, he grabbed the grand final, the biggest game of the year by the scruff of the neck, and ensured the Panthers would win their third straight premiership. Something unseen by rugby league since the 1980s, and something which had never been seen in the NRL. In doing so, to quote the eighth immortal Andrew Johns, Nathan Cleary elevated himself from a champion. He was rightly rewarded by winning his second Clive Churchill medal, becoming just the third player in history to win more than one. And I don't want to leave out the rest of the Panthers. Stephen Crichton continued his evolution to the best centre in the competition, with 3 big plays in the final few minutes. Moses Leota scored a try no prop should be able to through pure effort. Mitch Kenny grabbed his long-deserved first try of the season and remained as reliable as ever. In fact, I'm sure a whole video could be made just about this one performance by the 17 Panthers players on the pitch. But I digress. The facts speak for themselves. The Panthers won their third straight grand final and produced an unimpeachable argument for being the greatest team in NRL history. But even in the fallout of this game, the number one thought on every NRL fan's mind was, they can't win 4 in a row. Can they? You might be wondering when I'm going to start discussing 2024. After all, there's not much time left in the video, and I still need to cover one more full season where the Panthers won the comp for the 4th straight year. However, it's an easy one to cover, because I can just repeat what I've stated previously. Penrith lost 2 big stars who were both instrumental in the previous year's successes, suffered some early season defeats, which caused people to state that there was no way they could win it all again, dealt with Nathan Cleary being injured for large chunks of the season before returning to dominate the finals, all while being under the typical scrutiny that NRL media obsesses over. And like the 3 seasons preceding it, the 2024 season ended the exact same way. Another grand final win for the Penrith Panthers, their 4th in 4 years. And this time, they exercised the only remaining demon they had left, their 2020 grand final loss to the Storm. This year, they set the NRL record for the most consecutive grand final appearances, as well as most consecutive grand final wins. I'm sure this may come across as lazy to sum up their 2024 season so bluntly, but to me, it's a testament to their dominance. They win comps, despite losing a certifiable who's who of rep stars. They win comps, despite having their best player out injured for chunks of the season. They win comps even though nobody's won this many in a row since the 1960s. It should not be possible with the salary cap or with how the game has progressed. And yet with the Panthers, it's just become logical. Of course they've won 4 in a row. They're the Penrith Panthers. What else do they do? 4 grand final wins in a row, all won in 4 wildly different ways. Regular season dominance turning into 12 straight finals wins. This wasn't a team that bought greatness or had controversy surrounding its greatness. This was a team which rose out of the shadows of a decade of inconsistency and a high-profile humbling to seize greatness and hold it hostage until they see fit. Look at the calibre of the teams they've defeated in grand finals. A Wayne Bennett-coached Rabbitohs team. A Parramatta team fueled by the desire to break a premiership drought. The attacking brilliance of the 2023 Broncos. And the always consistent, always excellent Melbourne Storm. Against any other team, they win the comps in their respective years. Unfortunately, they faced the greatest team in NRL history. Their heartbreaks only build up the mythos of this Penrith dynasty. A team so unstoppable that they can lose representative quality players every year and seemingly get better and better. And as we head into 2025, Penrith are losing Taruva, Fisher-Harris, and Luai, among their biggest losses to date. And yet, nobody is doubting that they can win it all for a 5th straight year. Nothing in the past 4 years indicates the Panthers will buck their recent trends. Nothing in the past 4 years leads me to believe that they'll produce anything other than excellence. How can you possibly doubt the Penrith Panthers? In the NRL, a perfect season is impossible. But in the NRL, success is measured by the ability to win premierships. Right now, it's simply undeniable. The Penrith Panthers are the greatest team in NRL history.